Dialogic Disciple is an invitation
to explore discipleship
in dialogue with the world as disciples of the Word. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dialogic Disciple Podcast. My name is James and I'm here with my co-host,
Elizabeth Shaby.
Elizabeth. Guess what?
We have a guest.
We have a very special guest in the studio today.
The great Reverend Catherine Booth Olson.
Yay! I love being a very special guest.
Indeed.
Thanks
We've
for having
only
me.
had special guests up to this point. Now we have a very special guest. Catherine, it's good to have you here today. I'm going to start off by asking you what I've been asking everybody so far, which is, how's your Advent going?
Ooh, how's my Advent? I love Advent. It's
Yeah.
like one of my favorite seasons. I love a season of waiting and anticipation and of hope and preparing. I'm a really good preparer. Like I like checklist
Yes,
and
yes.
this team at Northside knows, like I love like all the getting ready. I like the logistics. So this is a good season for me. But this season I've really embraced the notion of Christ has come, Christ is coming, and Christ will come again. I think it's been a good Advent. Something's felt special about this Advent. So I've enjoyed this Advent.
I say, we had the same, Sarah said the same thing last week, but she was like, I know I'm really feeling Advent this year. I hadn't felt it quite the same way.
Yeah.
So,
I had that experience too. Like
it's been pretty much
Just
carbon
time
copy
to
for
be-
me. Same old.
apathy.
I'm just always excited during Advent. It's always good for me.
I mean, just last night, I moved the wise men a little closer and the shepherd got a little closer. Like they're making their way across
Making the way in the world today.
I will say, I don't know if my mom is listening to this podcast, but I moved her Jesus because when I got to her house a couple weeks ago, she had the Jesus in the manger, and I took Jesus out and I hid him. And I was waiting. How long would it be till I got the text message?
What'd you
Where's
do?
Jesus?
What'd you do with
I have not
Jesus?
received that text message yet. So
Don't
Mom,
worry, Mom. He is still in your
he's
heart.
in your heart.
No one can take your Jesus from you. I learned this in seminary. No one can steal your Jesus. He's still there with you at all times and in all places. The baby Jesus from the manger is just hidden. He will come back.
That's right.
No one can steal your
It
Jesus.
was a
love
couple of
it.
years ago that I stole the Jesus from your nativity from your office, and I don't think it got back until like March. I don't even know. So Jesus came late that year.
Oops.
But anyway, this week we're talking about we're still talking about Kenosis and the Advent devotional, but we're also talking specifically about Mary this week. A lot of Mary this week, mostly Mary.
And James, I do want to give you a shout out, a little extra credit, because I know this doesn't always happen, but a great job lining that up with the Advent wreath alignment.
Yeah.
Because we did light the pink candle and the Advent wreath, which is the Mary candle, and not always does this devotional line up with all the other symbolism. And great alignment this year.
You are welcome. That was totally intentional.
Why is Mary's candles pink? Why is Mary's candle pink?
Right, yeah.
She's a girl. Pink is for girls, right? Is that the theological reason?
It is not the
I believe
only
that's what it says in Scripture.
theological reason, but it is Mary's candle. It is her candle of joy. That Mary's joy, but it is the candle it's the only candle that has a person associated besides the Christ candle. All of the other candles
there you
are
go.
attributes,
Yeah.
and it is the
Yeah.
only candle that has a person associated.
Well, this is the one time of year that we talk a lot about Mary, and Mary has always been a fascinating character to me in Scripture, and I think she plays this role of kenosis very well. Becomes a very good model for us. I think a lot of times when you think about emptying ourselves and becoming like Jesus, it's hard for us to imagine being like Jesus because Jesus is Jesus, but Mary is just a person. Mary's just a human being. In fact, she was a very young human being when the story
She's
starts.
actually a girl. I mean, even harder to be like Jesus. She's a girl.
She's probably about 14 years old. And but we're talking about somebody who performs the act of discipleship and kenosis perfectly as a model for us. And we spend the entire week talking about her this week and really focusing around the three responses that she gives to that initial contact that she has at the Annunciation with Gabriel, and how she just really embodies that whole idea of, okay, here I am, take me, use me, I'm your servant, emptying herself of whatever she thought her life was going to be, whoever she thought she was going to be, and literally being filled with Jesus Christ in a way that we can all only hope to be filled with Jesus. So that's a good introductory kind of thoughts. Let's jump in. What do you guys want to talk about?
So one of the things that I loved thinking about who Mary is and what Mary offered. I do think it is interesting that in the passage we don't hear from most of the men. The last 2 weeks you've talked about the men, but we don't actually hear their voice a whole lot. But we hear a lot from Mary.
Yeah.
We hear her voice, we hear her response, her willingness to say yes, to sing a song of praise, to submit, to
Absolutely.
say I'm afraid, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Right. And it's diametrically opposed to, I think intentionally so, to Zechariah's response, earlier in the chapter where he's like, what? Nah. And he gets silenced.
I know, that is so fascinating
and
to me.
Mary embraces it full on. So the old priest man who should have expected something like this to happen can't figure it out and doubts. Whereas Mary, who knows what she's expecting, she just takes it. She's like, okay, this is it. I'm in. Let's go.
That's interesting in a culture where women really didn't have a lot of voice and didn't have a lot of authority with their voice.
Right.
Her voice has so much authority.
Absolutely.
And gratitude and joy in the midst of the unknown.
Absolutely.
It would be really, I think it's just, if you don't know what to say this Christmas season, if you're I don't know what to pray.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. I don't know how to get through.
Yeah.
If to pray Mary's words is, I think are just really
everything she says
beautiful
here,
prayers.
prayer. I read today on Facebook. I don't generally use Facebook on the podcast here, but I saw this today and I thought it was fun. So I'm just going to share it. This is, I guess, a meme or someone's tweet. I don't even know what the difference is, but it says here, every discussion of biblical womanhood should include the fact that in Luke 1, 2 pregnant women celebrate their new motherhood by passionately discussing the coming overthrow of every earthly empire. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. That's very good. That's very good. And Luke makes that clear right up at the front. Luke is more about the outcast and the marginalized than the other gospels. Mm-hmm. And here we have 2 women taking the primary role in the first chapter. We're not even out of the first chapter yet. And here we go.
And a young woman, I like how you set it up and you remind us it's a young woman and it's an old woman. Neither of whom would have been expecting or expected.
To expect.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read this fantastic article. It's not scripture, but it was based in scripture, and it was someone's just kind of holy imagining about what this time would have looked like between Mary and Elizabeth, and kind of this contrast between, this priest's wife, right, who kind of was asking for this blessing, asking for a child, hoping it, kind of given up on it, and she's much older, and then the contrast of this young woman, unmarried and didn't really know, and she gets this thing from God, and kind of what that time could have looked like that they spent together, and the gift that maybe they gave to each other in just comforting and sharing wisdom. And, maybe Mary helped Elizabeth get excited for this new season of life. And maybe her youth kind of refreshed her and, made her excited about it. And maybe Elizabeth's wisdom, helped Mary prepare. I don't know. It was just a lovely, just what does it look like to think about these 2 giants that we have in this story? And,
that question of, can you believe this is happening? This is the only other person on the planet that can say yes. Actually, I can believe this is happening because it's happening to me too. Right?
Well, and I wonder who else they initially told, right? Because I wonder who else really believed them. Because I imagine most people didn't. A lot of people didn't believe them. They would have doubted. They would have questioned. They would have critiqued. Joseph was going to leave her as kindly as he could have.
It's just going to sneak out the back door. All right.
So I just wonder who else who else in their inner circles would they have gone to?
Yeah.
But here they have each other. And in a season where I wonder how much both of these women how much could they actually did either of these women actually know how to read or write?
Yeah.
And could they have written to each other? How much, I just wonder what their interactions were. It's not like they were texting each other, send me your favorite baby blog.
Right.
Have you read this mommy website? Did you pick up this book at your favorite library? I just, they really, what did they have in regards to community? I think nowadays, when you're expecting something you're afraid of or excited for, nowadays we have so many resources.
Yeah, that's good.
And I wonder how few resources they had except for one another and their faith in the Lord God Almighty.
And I think their faith has to be an important part of this. I think we look at these stories as being joyful stories. Joy being the candle that's connected to Mary, and we think of childhood and motherhood as and child bearing and having babies as being a joyful moment, and this obviously being joyful for them because they're having these babies that are going to be big and important to history and all that. But it was completely would have been catastrophic for their lives as they knew them at the time. Yes. Right? Like Mary's life is never going to be the same, because even though she's having a child, and it wouldn't have been out of the ordinary for her to have a child in a normal way, but now who knows, like you said, like who believes her? Like I think for the rest of her life she's gonna have people in her life that's like, yeah, that's Mary, let me tell you what she did. She keeps saying this is the Son of God, right? But really, and then Elizabeth, who had basically given up on the idea of having a child and moved on probably in her mind and heart to other things, now all of a sudden it's here,
right?
And now
to figure that out,
and I'm sure John the Baptist was an easy kid to raise based on the very little that we know about him.
Thing.
And I think that's an interesting question. Like when most of us, whether we like the plans we have or not, most of us have a plan.
Yeah.
Like we have a rhythm. And I wonder if both of them were like, oh, we're going to have to like empty out some room. Like we're going to have to empty out a room.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're going to have to create literal space, not only in our bodies, but like in our homes. Like where is the space going to be for these unexpected children in our routine? Where is the unexpected space for them to take up our time and our income? Like every parent, they're like, where are we going to fit them into our lives?
Right. Because they don't generally come with a kid-shaped hole in our lives. For the most part, they don't fit easy in. They're just moving around, and that that's part of what you were talking about before. You said a lot of what you like about Advent is the planning and the expecting and all that stuff. But this is a story that tells us that no matter what we are planning or expecting, that it's God's plan and expectation that wins out in the end. So there's a collision of expectation here that I think is pretty important, particularly when we're starting to talk about the idea of kenosis and emptying ourselves, because that is not something that we were talking about before. It's not something the world really expects us to do. Is empty ourselves and step out of the way, and that radical humility of allowing God to work through us rather than us just taking the wheel and taking over and taking control.
And one of the things I have been wondering about as I was like kind of reading ahead, right, in preparation for being here, is there are very few times when I have thought of being empty as a win. And so I wanted to ask y'all, like, when or what, and this is probably true for the audience, those of you who are listening, like, pause with me for a minute. Like, when you're like, oh, emptiness is a value in this situation. Because let me tell you some situations it's not. An empty bank account, not a win. Right. An empty fridge, not a win.
Right.
Like
empty gas tank,
not
empty
a win.
Stomach, which mine is growling right now.
Yeah, so like,
yes,
right.
Like,
so like, and I'm trying to think of like, so you set us up for weeks, James, to go like emptiness, good, and emptiness, God comes in. But I'm like, yes, I agree with you. But like, I'm trying to like.
Now, this is fascinating because that word does not really have a great connotation, right?
It doesn't. No, it does not.
An empty room. We don't like things to be, Yeah.
An empty calendar maybe sounds like like sometimes at the start of a new year, you're like, you have an empty calendar that's full of possibility. It's full of potential. It's an empty canvas. But like, I mean, I would love maybe some of the people who listen to kind of like write in, but I'm like, I've really tried to kind of ponder like when is emptiness celebrated, because I think it should be like you're helping us imagine how emptiness is an invitation for God to be in charge, but that's so countercultural.
I would say two things. I think to answer that question, I would say the only time in my experience that it's felt good to be empty outside of this kind of way that we're talking about it with kenosis is after you've accomplished something huge and you've poured yourself out into it.
And it's done.
And it's done.
You have nothing else to do for a minute.
You have nothing left to give, but you've done it well, right? So you're empty, but you've run a long marathon. You've written a devotional. You've accomplished, something that you set your heart to, and you're done with it, and you did all you could do, and you're empty. And that kind of happy exhaustion that happens.
A completeness.
There's a moment. Yeah, there's a completeness, maybe a wholeness there. Mm-hmm. But I'll say, I think the main reason why we don't associate emptiness with anything good is because we're always talking about emptiness that's related to our wants, our desires, our dreams, and what we want. Like me, I. And it's an emptiness that comes without purpose. And that's one of the differences, I think, the key difference, actually, between what we're talking about with kenosis and what Jesus did for us in emptying himself, as well as what he's calling us to do in emptying ourselves. Is it's not emptiness with no purpose. It's an emptiness that is directed toward being filled with the Holy Spirit for the purpose of God. And that is not about what I want or what I plan or expect out of my life. It's about letting God pour into me his purpose, his plans, instead of me trying to figure that out myself. Does that make sense?
I was thinking about emptiness in relation to starting an artwork or a project, because I go through this process where I get really excited about the idea of doing something, and then all of a sudden you open up a blank canvas, whether it's on the computer or a piece of paper, and it's this panic moment of there's nothing there, right? It's empty. I don't know what to do with this. And then it's all of a sudden the pressure of you having to create something becomes overwhelming, and you don't know what it's going to look like, and I'm not going to be able to do it, and it's just kind of this roller coaster. And so maybe in relation to what you're talking about, it's thinking about how to channel that initial possibility, that initial creativity, in the sense of like, I'm not responsible for the end result. I'm not responsible for the thing that's going to come out of this. Mm-hmm. And so can I just stay in this curiosity? Can I stay in this imagination? Can I stay in the wonder of what might happen, and not go into the, I'm responsible for the thing, and if I try too hard, it's going to fail or whatever. I'm not going to do it like I want.
And I think that's important, because I think there's something separate from emptiness being lacking, because Mary nor, Elizabeth, nor the other folks you've talked about were lacking. I mean, we're all lacking without Christ, without the Holy Spirit, but like they weren't failing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But something about this being willing to find wholeness beyond yourself.
Yeah.
There's this notion that the wholeness is in the willingness to let go and to trust and to abide, but it's how do we frame that, like the void is actually filled with, there's a filling in a different way.
Yeah. Almost like an expansion that happens that then needs an additional filling. Maybe. I don't know. Like, I like the idea of what you said there, the finding wholeness outside of myself. So it's not like a be your best self now kind of situation where it's just whatever can fill me up, whatever makes me whole. That's not actually wholeness in the way that we're talking about in Christian faith, discipleship.
Yeah. I think Bill might have touched on this in his sermon last week, but thinking about how can I empty myself, but then also what can God do with that space? And maybe that kind of gets at what we're talking about. So not just thinking about what I need to let go of or what I need to empty myself of, but what are the possibilities of what God can do with that space?
Yeah.
And that's kind of a cool exercise, and there's that, what do I need right now? But not just that, right? It's not just a me focus. It is, what could God do here? What's possible?
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting. And I think just the permission to think about that emptiness isn't always negative. Now, yes, going hungry, kids being hungry is not good. Running out of gas is not ideal. Probably a lack of planning. But sometimes like Sabbath tending, like having a day without work, actually an empty work schedule is actually good. Yeah. So I think this helping us reframe the giving over of control.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
I think it's just helping us rechange our vocabulary. Might help some of us connect to this differently, because I just was struggling with the vocabulary. Like I don't want to be empty. I don't want to be depleted. I don't want to. But that's not what you're inviting us to. That's not what Christ is inviting us to completely. It's
and I think there's an importance in understanding the fact that this is a verb we're talking about. This is an activity of emptying, right? So finding yourself in an empty place is not good necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Emptying yourself is a whole different kind of process where you are taking the initiative and saying, I'm going to do this. So it's why people go, hunger is a bad thing, but people fast all the time for that exact same purpose, because it's the emptiness of their stomach that then attenuates you to the fact that you're empty in other ways, or that you need to be filled in other ways. So the intentionality behind kenosis, this is not an accident. Jesus didn't just happen to find himself empty. This is something that we have to do, and something that God himself did. And that's an important part of it, right?
Yeah, that's a good distinction. I like that. Intentionality. That's the word.
And we do get into this a little bit later in the devotional, toward the end of the 12 days of Christmas. We talk about the question, what do you do if you find yourself already empty? Like, we haven't, because we don't talk about that quite a lot in the previous stuff, but towards the end of the 12 days, we talk about the woman at the well, and how she kind of was already empty when she encountered Jesus. So what do you do then? So I think it's a good distinction to make, though. I
do think that is very helpful, the choice. I mean, I think, the notion that we have free will, and that in choosing to empty ourselves, we know we are getting something better.
Yeah.
Like, we know that encountering this living water, and we know encountering, this abundant life, that we are like resting in something that is going to be more rewarding than what we had to start with.
Yeah.
Like, and it's getting to a place where we can say, like, I know a day of rest is more valuable than a day.
Yeah, and that's where the faith
of
part
frenzied
comes in,
work.
Yeah,
I know that a day of connecting with the earth is more valuable than striving for material success, or whatever however we're emptying ourselves to reconnect with God. We know the value.
Yeah, to reconnect. 'Cause I was thinking about the like ready to receive, emptying in order to receive. So it's not emptying for the sake of being emptying. I was thinking about the woman at the well, right? Okay, so where is this human being at this moment? She's tired. Maybe she's empty. She's exhausted. She's maybe feeling some shame or whatever it is that she might be struggling with. And so it's the learning how to take that. So I feel empty. I've got all this, this framework. I feel empty. So it's turning that into being ready to receive that living water. How do I reframe this emptiness? Maybe. I like that. But I like the reconnect. That's a good word too. So reconnecting is an interesting way to talk about this shift between Advent and Christmas, right? If we're thinking of the season of emptying, and now suddenly, right, it's the preparation, the emptying, and now we're almost here at this opportunity to reconnect, to receive. It's Christmas. It's,
Christmas.
That's quite a shift.
Yeah, as I have said to a number of parents, like, take a deep breath. We are gonna make it.
I'm watching it for Christmas.
Sorry, I can't sing along with you, friends. A glorious moment.
You can.
Glorious moment. But
joyful noise.
We're gonna make it. But I think, I am curious. Here, Mary, in the midst of knowing that she's been given this gift, but also in some ways a burden, a responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I was curious what y'all might be doing to stop and to pause and to truly have a moment to kind of worship in these next few days, because I think we often get busy wrapping gifts and cooking meals and preparing to leave to go see people, or preparing for people to come, and sometimes we forget to do the kind of the glorifying and magnifying of God, and we do all the duty of tending to the day, but not the actual worshiping.
I think that's even more acute for people who work in the church, serve in the church, because even Christmas Eve, we're going to have 5 services here, and I'll be here for all 5 of them. But in the past, it's always been difficult to find a moment where, I'm actually doing the worshiping, right? And not just doing the other pieces. But I think that's a good word. Like, how do we find time to glorify the Lord, as Mary does in Luke chapter 1 with the Magnificat? Magnify the Lord, glorify the Lord in this transition moment between Advent and Christmas.
So I do wonder, what are people doing just to stop and to pause? Have you set aside some time where you're like, I'm going to, listen to the Christmas carols. I'm going to read the devotional. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to clear the calendar. I'm going to find the empty piece of paper and write the thank you note. I'm going to.
Yeah.
What is for you, or for me, the actual act of giving back to God what God is worthy of?
Yeah.
In worship. And so for me, I really try, for us, since our worship services here at Northside are during the day, our last one is, at 6, I'll plan to worship at 11.
Yeah.
because I'm a late night person. I like an evening worship service.
Yeah.
And it's a service where no one knows me. Like, I'm not the reverend.
Right.
No one knows me. I haven't decided yet if I'm showing up in person or showing up online.
Yeah.
But like, I'm going to go to worship at 11.
That's good.
That's always
Because
my favorite.
That's what I need to be able to just not be responsible.
Yeah.
But for some people, y'all don't need another worship service. Y'all are going to come at 2 or 4, but you're going to have your kids with you, and you're going to have your in-laws with you, and you're going to have to get here. And so maybe it is that or not. And I get for some people, they can bake, and that can be their gift.
Yeah.
Right.
For some people, it's going to be writing notes. Some people, it's going to be sitting quietly with their cup of coffee. I wonder if you've taken the time to like truly stop and be intentional, as we've said, about what that would be. Because I think often our parents think Christmas is for kids.
Right.
Or grandparents think it's for grandkids. But like, Christ actually came for each and every one of us. Like, Christ has come for you. And are you ready to encounter him? Like, are you ready to be open enough to receive him anew? Or are you going to be so busy that he like comes and goes, and you hit the 5th day of Christmas and you're like, oh, wait.
For me, it's I think the tradition that I have kept forever and always is I watch It's a Wonderful Life on Christmas Eve on NBC at 8 p.m. And I've done that for almost 30 years now. And it's always that moment for me, I think. It is that moment of like peace and reflection. And a lot of times I'm by myself when I'm watching it. So, other people have other commitments or whatever they're going on. So it's always a moment of like that silent night kind of feel to it. And it's a ridiculous movie that doesn't really have a lot to do with Christmas. It has a lot more to do with communism than Christmas, but it has been that for me, for sure. And I think also here at Northside, like that last service that we do when it's dark outside and we light our candles and we're all singing Silent Night, that's always a moment that gives you chills, gives you goosebumps, and makes you, I think, at least recognize the power of the moment in the sense of God becoming a human being. I think that's what's been for me over the past few years.
The moment here at Northside, because I've worked Christmas Eve the last 2 years maybe, and that moment I working in between worshiping, I don't know if I ever sat down in a worship service entirely, but that moment where the candles and everyone raises them and we sing Silent Night in the dark, like that is gold. That is, oh man, that is just so beautiful. I've generally been at different churches over the years because my parents have moved around. And so I've struggled with not being at home, or whatever my conception of home is, on Christmas. And I was thinking as you were talking, it never felt good. It never felt up like a positive thing, but how I could kind of see that as a expectation jogging sort of experience, which really is what Jesus is about. It's not always comfort and what you thought. It is sometimes something new and different. And I think this year I'm leaning more towards what you were talking about, Catherine, whereas I will be at a church I maybe never have been at before, and it'll be nice. That will be lovely. It won't be a church I consider my home church, but it'll be a kind of a different experience. And so maybe, what does it mean to see that in kind of that jogging, unexpected sort of light? Jesus comes in and surprise, it's not what you thought.
I will also be looking for Jesus in the camel. I know.
Is it going to happen this year?
I know.
Are we doing the camel this year?
I know folks question whether a camel is necessary for Christ to be born in our hearts again. But why the camel is so important to me is that real joy. Like the camel has nothing to do in the nativity story. Like in Bethlehem, there
as a second lobster.
As much as a second lobster and Love Actually, right? But it's that joy of like this ridiculous camel. Yeah. In Buckhead, Georgia. And it really is like the stupidity of it.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Well, yeah.
It's the wonder. It's the unexpectedness. It's the wonder of it. It is the joy of it. It's the fact that it's utterly ridiculous on some level that you can get lost in it. Like for me, it's like this the absurdity is like Christ shows up in absurd ways.
Yes, that's good.
And
that's
like,
really
so
good.
it's like the fact that I can go take a selfie with a camel, like that God shows up in camels. And like, So go look for God to show up at a gas station or in a bathtub or in your waffles. And if you missed it and you're listening to this a couple days later, like
he's still showing
think
up.
back or keep looking because God is going to show up.
Yeah.
Like
Christmas is 12 days long. Also, by the way, folks,
it is.
I mean, we try to press that. I try to press that around here, but
we got till Epiphany, and if we read scriptures thoroughly, as James would invite us, and the folks here at Northside, not just the clergy, but the entire team, the wise men didn't show up in those first 12 days.
No,
right.
It took them a long time. So,
a little bit of time.
Christ has shown up and will show up and will keep showing up if we are ready to receive, and even when we're not ready to receive.
That's good.
So, like if we are,
a lot of times we're not ready.
Yeah.
I think it's good.
And that's that give me eyes to see prayer and ears to hear that I love, that help me to see it because you are there, God.
Yeah.
Give me eyes to see.
and the hands to receive and the feet to walk. Like, and I think that's what this invitation to kenosis is like. Your hands aren't open if you're clinging to something else.
That's really good.
Your feet aren't, moving if they're already stuck on a commitment. Like I can only do it this way.
Yeah.
Like it can only, Christ only shows up at this service at this time at this church in this way. No, like give me the feet to go to the church where Christ might show up in another congregation at another time, and I'll come home. Like, but for this one evening, I got to go somewhere else, and this one day I might need to find at a different meal and a different tradition with some in a different conversation.
I like that you're going to the 11 o'clock service, or the what we call the midnight service, because it ends at midnight and it's kind of transitioning into Christmas Day with all the candles and stuff. I did that until, my grandmother loved doing that. We did that every year until I was about 14 years old. We would go in Muskogee, Oklahoma. We'd go to St. Paul's United Methodist Church because that's the only church in town that would do it. And we would go at like 11 o'clock, and I always kind of hated it a little bit, but I always kind of loved it too. I always hated going, but I thought it was powerful when we got there.
Yeah.
Until I was about 14, and then we woke up on Christmas morning to open up all our gifts and everything, and it turns out somebody didn't blow their candle out, and the whole church burned down.
You're kidding me.
On Christmas morning, yeah. Which is why we started watching It's a Wonderful Life on Christmas Eve instead, about 28 years ago. They rebuilt the church. Everything's fine. No one got injured or hurt or anything like that, but it's still kind of catastrophic. So, everyone blow your candles out. That's a really important part of the ceremony.
Thank you for that public service announcement.
Yes, indeed.
Wow.
But yeah, that was the year I got a bow and arrow for Christmas.
Other PSA, just for our Northside folks who are listening, to clarify, we do not have an 11 o'clock service here at Northside.
Yeah.
So our latest service is at 6.
10, 12, 2, 4, 6, 5:15 communion.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. But yes, 11 o'clock was always my favorite too. The church I grew up at had that as well. And I remember that, when I was really young, young enough, and I would sleep on the pew, you curl up and go to sleep, to like standing there and being awake for the whole thing and enjoying it. And that's cool. Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for being here.
Well, I hope that you have a very merry and happy Christmas. I'm going to see you plenty on Christmas. I hope the camel thing works out.
You know what? These last few days of preparation, anticipation, expectation, and then I hope to see y'all for the 12 days of Christmas into January.
Indeed.
Yes, absolutely.
Indeed.
Merry Christmas. Happy Camel.
And
the camel will be at Northside, so come for that.
if nothing else. And Elizabeth, thank you as always for being here. And guys, thank you for listening. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you.
Merry Christmas.
We'll see you during the 12 days of Christmas.
Merry Christmas.